Trespassers, a tribute to Benny Rothman and all fighters for the freedom to roam. Book 2, Connie Gartside's Triumph, a tale of family values. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than the unsuccessful man with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education alone will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Calvin Coolidge, 1872 to 1933. Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 1. Autumn was fast turning to winter. The Cowle had already fled the High Peak moors for their annual winter holiday on the Lancashire coastal estuaries. The sheep were beginning to gradually descend from the high ground to the lower slopes. The sky was overcast and gloomy, although it had only just gone noon. Life on the Gartside's farm, nestling below the soaring mass of Kinder Scout in the High Peak of Derbyshire, was beginning to slow down as the days grew shorter. However, the playground of nearby Birchvale Secondary School did not reflect this seasonal change. The prevailing atmosphere was one of shrieks and giggles and laughter, as a horde of boisterous children participated in the variety of activities children do best when freed from study and classwork. Connie Gartside, in her second year at the school, stood out from the rest, apart from one other, a boy of her own age, with whom she was deep in conversation. The lad was Mikey Grimsditch. He was desperate to get back into Connie's good books. Connie was equally keen to be on good terms with him, but anybody listening to their conversation could be forgiven for believing the opposite was the case. Basically, Connie was playing with Mikey's affections and enjoying every moment of the subtle torture she was subjecting him to. Finally, the young girl shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mikey. Tell your mum I'm not able to come for tea tonight. I'm meeting Rosie." Mikey shrugged, trying to hide his disappointment. He'd pulled out all the stops persuading his mother to invite Connie to share tea with them that evening, and it had all been to no avail. The sound of the bell ending the lunch break rescued him from further embarrassment. As they began to make their way inside, Connie stopped. "You can walk home with me if you like, Mikey." The lad's face lit up momentarily. "Of course I will," he responded, trying to sound matter-of-fact, but all too conscious he wasn't exactly succeeding. Rosie Ackroyd had a smile on her face as she climbed aboard the bus that would transport her from Stockport to Hayfield, her rucksack on her back. It was a rare event nowadays if she failed to travel straight from school on a Friday afternoon to spend the weekend with Connie, Ralph and Titch. Sometimes her grandfather travelled with her, and occasionally her mother, but more often than not she travelled alone. Now approaching her 14th birthday, her mother had finally realised she was extremely sensible and quite capable of looking after herself within limits. It was the 1st of November, and she had a whole week with no school and bonfire night to look forward to. She was still in her school uniform, but she'd already exchanged her shoes for walking boots, and her blazer was hidden by a wind and waterproof jacket. She climbed the winding stairs. Her favourite seat at the front was taken, but its counterpart on the right was vacant. She made her way to it, slinging the rucksack from her shoulder and carefully placing it on the floor between her legs. She borrowed her mother's binoculars, which were safely stowed in the bag, as well as their leather case. She wasn't taking any chances with them. It almost seemed a lifetime away, but it was just 2 years previously that Grandad had first taken her to Hayfield to visit the scene of the mass trespass of Kinder Scout, which he had participated in way back in 1932. Next April will be the 60th anniversary of that historic and groundbreaking event, and she was already aware that plans were well underway to celebrate. That was one of the reasons she was travelling alone to meet her friends. Grandad was a member of the Ramblers Association and was on the organising committee. He had a meeting that night. By the time they'd reached the small village of High Lane, it was already dark. The A6 was full of traffic in both directions, a sluggish stream of red lights preceding the bus, and a rapid, bright white river approaching them. Rosie looked out for the familiar landmarks, the impressive gates marking the entrance to Lyme Park, the Ram's Head in the centre of Disley, then the descent into New Mills past Newtown Station, and at long last the Waltzing Weasel. "What time is Rosie's bus due in?" "Mum, that's the third time you've asked me. The same time as always, 5:25. "Well, it's 4:45. Don't you think you should be on your way?" "Oh my goodness, is it that late?" "Wrap up warm, love, and don't forget your torch." "I'll come with you, Connie." Ralph was already donning his jacket and Titch was standing by the kitchen door, eager to join them. Their timing was perfect. 40 minutes later, as they crossed the main road that sliced through the bottom remnant of the village, passengers were beginning to disembark from the bus, and Rosie, as usual, was in the lead. She hugged Connie and then squatted down to receive Titch's greeting, fondling the Manchester Terrier's ears as he licked her face. Ralph looked on, an amused grin on his own face. "Let me have your rucksack, Rosie." She rose, swinging the bag from her shoulder to hand it to him. "How are you, Ralph?" "Fine, Rosie. Let's get moving. The wind's beginning to bite." They made their way across the main road and into Hayfield proper to begin their journey up to Colwell Clough and the farm. Rosie suddenly became aware of the wind. It began to blow in noisy gusts, sending the dry leaves collected in the gutter by the old church into a skittering rustle of a dance across the road. They passed the Three Trees Cafe, crossing the river set by the narrow stone bridge, and turned right to access the lane known as Kinder Road. As they did so, it started to rain. Not that Rosie minded. She was used to changeable weather in this part of the world, and was dressed accordingly. There was every chance the morning would bring dry weather. Eventually they passed the Sportsman and reached the junction where the lane up Colwell Clough struck off to the right over Bowden Bridge. Rosie had been amazed by the number of tents pitched on the campsite, which no doubt explained why the pub had been such a beacon of light and merriment. There must have been a couple of dozen. There were no streetlights now, and Connie and Ralph switched on their torches to illuminate the pitch dark. The sound of running water from the brook added to the sigh of the gusting wind and the crunch of their boots on loose gravel. They were soon making the final climb through the dense canopy of trees immediately before the farm, when the beam of headlights from a vehicle travelling towards them intermittently swept the hillside as it followed the curving lane. Then they heard the sound of its engine, and found themselves blinded as it crested the hill and swept into view. Instinctively all three moved to the right-hand side of the lane, leaning against the dry stone wall, turning away to protect their eyes from the glare. The vehicle kept its lights on full beam as it swept past them at speed. Ralph, turning as it passed, realised it was a Land Rover towing a covered trailer. He watched as it descended the hill and turned left down Kinder Road, barely slowing down to negotiate the junction. "Maniac!" he ejaculated angrily. "Was that Billy Cragg?" Connie asked. "No, his Land Rover's grey, not blue. Anyway, he'd have slowed down and dipped his headlights as soon as he saw us." They made their way through the farm gate and walked down the path and around the cattle byre to access the yard and the kitchen door. Mrs. Gartside looked up as they entered. "Did you have a good journey, Rosie?" "Yes, thanks, Mrs. Gartside." "Apart from the fact we were nearly mown down by a road dog," Connie added. The expression on Mrs. Gartside's face immediately changed to one of concern. "Road dog?" "A Land Rover and trailer," Ralph explained, under the trees where the lane narrows. He shot through as though the devil was on his wheels." Elsie blanched. This was the spot where the motorcyclist had hit Connie, and where her daughter had lost the bottom half of her right leg. Connie, sensing her mother's alarm, reacted accordingly. "Don't be upset, Mum. As you can see, we're all safe and sound." Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 2. "What do you fancy doing today?" Rosie laughed as she snuggled under the warm duvet. "I don't want to think about it. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. Absolutely nothing. I'm as snug as a bug in a rug." "Oh, come on, lazy bones. You can't waste the day." "I don't intend to waste the day. I intend to stay warm and recharge my batteries." "Please yourself, but you'll be going hungry." Connie gave a final grunt as she fitted the stump of her leg into the socket of her artificial limb. Pulling her cord trousers on, she left the bedroom, but not before she'd drawn the curtains to let the early morning daylight weakly illuminate the room, and then, as a parting shot to her friend, sent a pillow flying through the air, grinning gleefully as it found its target. She left the bedroom door open behind her, for strategic reasons, resolving to do the same with the door at the bottom of the stairs which accessed the kitchen. Rosie's determination to have a lie-in began to evaporate at roughly the same rate as the scent of cooking breakfast wafted up the stairs from the kitchen. Before she knew it, she was climbing out of bed and putting on her clothes, ready to do battle with a new day. A glance out of the window told her the morning was dry, although how long it would remain so was another matter. She retrieved her watch from the bedside table. 7:45, she noted. As she entered the kitchen, Ralph and his father were about to leave. "Ah, there you are, young Rosie," Mr. Gartside beamed. "Connie said they were staying in bed." Rosie smiled. "I had second thoughts. I realised I'd be needed to keep her out of mischief." The farmer chuckled. "Fat chance, but I wish they looked, lass." With that he made for the door, followed by Ralph. "See you later, Rosie," the latter said, as he shut the door behind him. She gazed out of the window as he crossed the yard, wishing he'd stayed long enough for a chat, although she knew, if he had, she would most probably have found herself tongue-tied. Ralph was now 17, and seemed hopelessly out of her reach, but a girl could dream. "Would you like mushrooms, Rosie?" She turned with a start. "Yes, please. Can I help you?" "No, everything's under control. Connie's just gone to get some eggs from the cellar, but you could put some more coal on the fire." Rosie turned to do as bid. Titch, sprawled out on the flock mat, warming his belly, looked up at her with his dark brown liquid eyes, and wagged his tail as she approached. She fondled his ears before picking up the ornate iron claws to pick a lump of coal out of the bucket and place it carefully on the burning embers. "What are your plans for the day, Rosie?" "I'm not sure. Connie will no doubt decide. She usually does, and I'm happy to go along with whatever she wants to do." Mrs. Gartside laughed. "You've transformed her life, Rosie. It's good for her to have a friend of more or less her own age. It's not easy for a young girl in a house full of males." "I thought she had a sister." "She has, but we didn't plan it very well. Her sister's the eldest of 5 children. She was married by the time Connie was 6. Before Rosie could respond, the cellar door opened and Connie entered the room. "Fancy meeting you here," she said with a grin. "I thought you'd decided to stay in bed." Rosie ignored her. "Pity you missed Ralph." "I didn't. He hadn't left when I got up." "Have you told him yet?" Mrs. Gartside looked up from her frying pan. "Told him what?" "Rosie's madly in love," Connie responded. Rosie blushed, feeling as though her face was burning. "Connie!" Mrs. Gartside laughed. "Leave the lass alone, Connie. Affairs of the heart are not to be belittled." Rosie didn't know where to put herself. Come on, Rosie, love, take no notice of Connie. I hear she's fallen for Mikey Grimsditch, although what she sees in that young scoundrel I'll never know. Mikey is not a scoundrel, Connie responded sharply, and anyway, he's just a friend. Have it your way, Connie dear. Sit down, Rosie. Your breakfast's ready. Help me dish it out, Connie, and then I'll poach your eggs. At that point, the phone rang. Can you answer it, Connie? I'll sort Rosie's breakfast. Rosie immediately went to assist, as Connie did as she was asked. Gartside Farm, good morning. A pause. Yes, I think so. Just a moment, let me check. Mum, can you manage a room for 2 tonight, bed and breakfast? Yes, love. Yes, we can manage that. Can you let me have your name, please? Yes. No problem, Mr. Gorbooth. About 8:30. Yes. The first farm on the left as you breast the top of the first rise of Cowle Clough, just after the tunnel of trees crossing the lane. Yes. You can park your car anywhere on the track through the farm gate. Fine. I'll let Mum know. Thank you. She turned to her mother. He sounds a bit posh, Mum. Your fame must be spreading. It takes all sorts to make a world, Connie. As long as they behave themselves, I don't mind. With breakfast over, Connie suggested they should walk up to the top of the Kinder Downfall, but before Rosie could respond, Connie's mother intervened. I need you to go into Hayfield first. We're going to need more bacon and a fresh supply of tomatoes for tomorrow. I didn't expect guests tonight. OK, Mum. We've got plenty of time to go up to the Downfall later. Well, just be careful on the road. Mum, I'm the last person you need to tell that. Yes, you're right, love, but I can't help worrying. You used to tell me that worrying never buttered parsnips. Mrs. Gartside laughed. Did I? Yes, Mum. Now, is there anything else you need? A large loaf, white, unsliced. There's some money in my purse. Make sure you take enough. You can buy Rosie and yourself a treat. Thanks, Mum. We won't be long. Are you ready, Rosie? Don't forget Titch. The last remark was superfluous. Titch was already at the door, ears erect and tail wagging in anticipation. Right, that's sorted. Now, what shall we have for a treat? How about a lemonade at the cafe? We could buy sweets. I'd rather sit in the cafe. OK, the 3 Trees it is. They were soon sat down at a table by the window, Titch making himself comfortable on the floor between their legs. The cafe was full of people who, judging by their bags, had been shopping like themselves. A waitress approached, notepad in hand. I think I'll have tea, Connie informed Rosie. It's too cold for lemonade. Rosie nodded. I'll have the same. Pot of tea for 2, please, Connie said to the waitress, sounding all grown up. Would you like anything else? Not for the moment, thank you, Rosie responded, putting on what she thought was a rather middle-class accent. Both girls giggled as the waitress turned away. Then Rosie was pointing out the window. Oh, look, there's Mikey Grimsditch. Connie was out of her seat in a flash and exiting the cafe door almost before Rosie realised what was going on. Next moment, Mikey was crossing the road, accompanied by another lad. They both entered, following in Connie's wake. Hello, Rosie, Mikey said as he took her seat. She returned what she thought was his half-hearted smile and said, Hiya. The other lad sat down without saying anything. So what have you been up to, Mikey? Connie asked. Not a lot. Hayfield's dead. Rosie looked at him for a moment before asking, What makes you say that? Nothing exciting ever happens here. I wish I lived in Manchester. Well, I'm from Manchester, and I now live in Stockport, but I think there's far more excitement out here. Hayfield's a dump. I can't wait to leave school and get away from here. Connie frowned but didn't say anything. Don't you enjoy school? Why should I? I'm not learning anything. The teachers are boring. It's all a waste of time, Rosie. But what will you do? What kind of work can you get if you give up on school? I'll do anything. I just want to get away from here. But this is such a beautiful area, Rosie responded, somewhat taken aback by his negative attitude. You're in the midst of wonderful countryside. There's so much to do, and you have family and good friends here. Mikey stood up, shaking his head. I have no real family, he said, making for the door. He turned towards them, but looked straight at Connie. And I have no real friends here either. His companion stood up, shrugged his shoulders, and followed him, remaining silent as he had done throughout. Connie watched, a crestfallen expression on her face, as he walked over the bridge and turned right, ignoring his companion, who was hurrying to catch him up. What did he mean when he said he had no real family? Rosie asked. His father left his mother in the lurch. As soon as he found out he'd put her in the family way, he left Hayfield, and he's never been seen since. That's terrible. Poor Mikey. Never mind poor Mikey. What about his mother? She's the one who's been hit the hardest. Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 3. As the girls made their way up the Kinder Road, a woman was sweeping the front doorstep of the end cottage of a short terrace of houses on the edge of the village. Hello, Pearl, is Mikey in? The woman ceased her work. Hello, Connie, love. Yes, he's slumped in front of the telly, and he's in a foul mood. Can I see him? Of course you can. You might cheer him up. Go straight in. Let me finish this and I'll make a brew. I've just baked some scones. Oh, this is my friend Rosie. Pearl laughed. I know, but I'm very pleased to meet you, Rosie. Her careworn face lit up in a smile, which Rosie returned. Both girls made their way into the cottage's small living room, preceded by Titch. As his mother had predicted, Mikey was slumped in front of the television, looking dejected. The terrier approached him, his tail wagging, no doubt expecting to be petted. Mikey studiously ignored him. What are you doing here? He asked, without getting up. We're going up onto Kinder when we've taken this shopping back to Mum. I thought you might like to come with us. He stared at Connie for a moment, obviously undecided. Eventually, he made his mind up. No, he said sharply. I'm happy where I am. Mikey, don't be like that. Like what? Just leave me alone, Connie Gartside. I don't want to spend time with you. Okay, if that's how you feel, we'll leave you to it. With that, Connie left, followed by a bemused Rosie. That was quick, Pearl said. Connie shrugged. Mikey wants to be on his own. I'll see you later, Pearl. Yes, see you soon, Connie, and you, Rosie. She watched them make their way up the lane, a frown on her brow, before returning to her sweeping. Mikey really is in a bad mood, Rosie observed quietly. Yes, and yesterday he was pleading with me to have tea with him and his mother. Rosie looked at her in astonishment. And you refused, playing hard to get as usual, I suppose. Rosie sounded angry. Connie looked uncomfortable. I had to meet you, she protested. And anyway, I did let him walk me home from school. Oh, Connie, no wonder he's upset. You could have had tea with him. Ralph was meeting me and we could have met up later. You know very well Mikey's mad about you. The younger girl remained silent. For once she didn't have a smart answer. Her friend was right. Maybe she'd played with Mikey's emotions once too often. They continued walking up the lane in silence, a silence not broken until they were approaching the farm. I think you've got to find a way of letting Mikey know you care about him, Connie. Who says I care about him? You have, and you know you do. You told me last year, and it's obvious you're feeling guilty now. You've been as quiet as a mouse for ages. Connie kicked a loose stone across the road, disconsolately. But how do I tell him? Rosie shook her head. I'm not sure, but there must be a way. Well, maybe, but I don't know what to do. Perhaps we'll think of something when we're up on Kinder. Do you still want to go? Of course I do. I haven't travelled all the way here to mope about indoors. I can do that in Stockport. Mikey? Yes, ma'am. What did Connie want? They were going up onto Kinder. Well, why didn't you go with them? I didn't want to. Pearl Grimsditch shook her head. Mikey was going through a bad patch. I'll tell you what, make me a cup of tea, and we'll have some scones. That might cheer you up. Do I have to? Mikey, what's got into you? You're not normally like this. He shrugged, but rose from the sofa anyway, and made his way into their small back kitchen to put the kettle on. Can you put the bacon and tomatoes in the fridge for me, please, Connie? I've already done it, Mum. Your change is on the table. Good girl. I don't know what I'd do without you sometimes. Can I make you a cup of tea, Mrs. Gartside? Oh, Rosie, love, that would be perfect. But I thought you were going for a walk. We are, but we're not in a rush, Mum, Connie responded. Rosie was already filling the kettle. Elsie finished her task of placing damp clothes on the rack over the fireplace and hoisted it up to the ceiling. There, that's another job done. I can take the weight off my feet for a minute. She made her way to the large white deal table and sat down. Connie joined her. Was the village busy? The 3 Trees was heaving. There were quite a few walkers about. First weekend of the school holidays. It always makes a difference. Yes. Elsie sensed her daughter was distracted. We met Mikey Grimsditch, Rosie intervened. That's nice. She glanced at her daughter. He's not a bad lad, really. A bit harum-scarum, but he was very good when Connie lost her leg. We couldn't have kept him away from the farm if we'd wanted to. Connie remained silent, her eyes focused on the tabletop. It must have been a horrible time for you. It was, Rosie, but Mikey Grimsditch was like a ray of sunshine in a gloomy, overcast world. There was nothing he wouldn't do to help, and he was but a little mite, 6 years of age, and acting like a grown-up. He doted on our Connie even then. I need a pee, Connie said, and with no more ado left the kitchen for the outside toilet in the yard. Why's Connie so quiet, Rosie? She's worried she's upset Mikey. Why on earth should she think that? He asked her to tea yesterday, and she wouldn't go. When we talked to him today, he was obviously down in the dumps. He said he wanted to get away from Hayfield, that he had no real family and no real friends here. That's not right. Mikey's a bit of a loner, but there's plenty of people who like him, me for one. And as for family, his mother's a wonderful young woman, no matter what some narrow minds might say. But you said he was a bit of a scoundrel earlier. Elsie frowned and juggled. That was more of a playful dig at Connie. I just meant he was into mischief. There's no harm in the lad and a great deal of good. Are there any other family members in his life? Elsie's eyes narrowed. His grandmother in Little Hayfield, but I don't think they have any contact. Anticipating Rosie's next question, she added, his grandfather died not long ago, but he'd thrown Pearl, that's Mikey's mother, out of the house when he discovered she was pregnant. Straight-laced, narrow-minded church people, the elder Grimsditches, with no understanding of the role of love, compassion, or charity, let alone simple Christian duty. I doubt if there's been any contact between them since. How old was Mikey's mother at the time? 16, I think. Yes, she must have been. She just started work at the co-op. 16? That's terrible. How can parents be so mean? She was only 2 years older than I am now. I thought you were 13, Rosie. It's my birthday at the end of the month. Oh, we'll have to celebrate. Anyhow, most people rallied round young Pearl, and luckily her manager had a much better attitude than her parents. He didn't sack her, and he found her somewhere to live. Once she had Mikey, he even kept her job open for her until she was able to return to work. Not many employers would have done that. At that point, Connie came back into the kitchen. "Are you coming or not, Rosie?" "Of course I am. I've been waiting for you." "Well, I've been waiting for you." Elsie laughed. "Don't you two start arguing. It's bad enough that you've upset young Mikey, Connie. I think you should apologise to him as soon as possible and tell him how you really feel about him." Connie glared at her mother, then gave Rosie a withering look, and with no more ado stomped out of the house, slamming the door behind her with a resounding bang. "Did I say something?" Elsie asked. "I'd better go after her," Rosie responded. "Don't forget your binoculars, love." Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 4. "Connie, wait for me!" The younger girl ignored her. She'd already squeezed through the narrow gap in the dry stone wall and was marching resolutely in a diagonal across the field, Titch running ahead of her. Rosie began to run to catch up. Her friend was no slouch when it came to speed walking, despite her artificial leg. Connie was about to squeeze through the gap in the next wall before she finally caught her. "I thought we were going for a walk together," Rosie said, after she'd caught her breath. "Some friend you turned out to be." "What on earth do you mean?" "Telling Mum about Maggie Grimsditch." "You're being silly." "No, I'm not. You didn't have to tell Mum I fancy him." "You're quite right. I didn't have to tell her. She already knew." Connie didn't look convinced, although she knew it was true. She set off once more. Rosie followed, wondering how she could placate her friend. They'd already reached the mermaid's pool before she broke the silence. "Perhaps we should ask Coventina what to do about Mikey." Connie stopped abruptly and turned to face her friend. "There's no need to make fun of me." Rosie shook her head. "You really are in a tantrum, aren't you?" "No, I'm not." "Well, why do you assume I'm ribbing you?" "Because of what happened last Easter Eve." "But it was very exciting, Connie, and Ralph caught the gamekeepers, and they're in jail just where they belong, and it was all because of you insisting we came up here to see the water goddess at midnight." Connie's green eyes narrowed cat-like. She turned and continued her uphill march. Rosie watched her for a moment and then looked upwards to the jagged, dark, gritstone outcrops marking the boundary between moor and sky before following in her friend's tracks. They were climbing up a steep, barely defined trap to the right-hand side of the Red Brook. Despite the previous night's rain, the water coming over the downfall was a mere trickle of silver. The sky remained grey and overcast, and there was little breeze. Both girls remained silent. At the best of times, this was a place to save breath, such was the incline they were making their way up. Not for the first time, Rosie marvelled at Connie's tenacity and determination. This was a test for the fittest human being, let alone for one reliant on an artificial limb. Eventually, they were making their way onto the plateau, threading their way through overhanging rocks of millstone grit, oxidized black. Rosie had the sudden idea they were about to enter into a prehistoric world. Once on the top, Connie flopped to the ground, her back against a massive wind, rain, and ice-sculptured rock, whose smooth, rounded, and intricate shape reminded Rosie of a photograph Grandad had shown her of a bronze sculpture by somebody called Henry Moore. Rosie stood by the side of her friend for a moment, leaning against the rock. She unfastened the leather case hanging round her neck and took out the binoculars to contemplate the panorama lay out before her. "Magic," she said out loud, before taking her seat next to her companion and replacing the glasses in their case. Connie began to remove her right-hand trouser leg from a long woolen sock and then to roll it above her knee. "Is it hurting?" Rosie asked as she watched. "Not really. I just want to give my stump some fresh air." Titch appeared and took a seat leaning against Connie's left leg. "Do you remember when you told me about the phantom pains you used to have long after you'd lost it, and how long it was before you finally came to terms with the fact that you had lost it. Connie glanced across at her. She fondled Titch's velvety ear. Yes, well, when my dad was killed, something similar happened to me. It was maybe a year later. I was walking along Castle Street in Edgeley, near where we live. I spotted a man on the other side of the road, ahead of us, and walking in the same direction. "Look," I said to Grandad, "there's Dad," and I began to drag Grandad across the road. I really thought it was him. Grandad had to restrain me and to remind me my dad was dead and I would never see him again. "I didn't know your dad had been killed. I just thought you didn't have a dad." "Everybody must have had a dad at some point, Connie. Maybe Mikey's having similar problems." "Mikey never met his dad." "Yes, but he knows he has one somewhere. There could be all kinds of things going through his head. Do any of the other kids tease him because he's illegitimate?" "There was one other lad used to call him Bastard, but Mikey soon sorted him out. I don't think anybody else has said anything. Most kids who know him like Mikey, and they couldn't care less about his parentage." "Do you mind if I talk to him, Connie? I might be able to help, and if he knows I lost my dad, that might help to build a bridge between us." Connie shrugged. "I suppose so, but it might be easier if I just do what Mum said." "Well, I think that's right, but it might help if I speak to him first as well. It could make it easier for you." "It might, but let me think about it, Rosie." "Okay, but does that mean we're friends again?" Connie laughed. "I didn't know we'd stopped being friends." Rosie shook her head, and then rooted in her pocket, retrieving a brown paper package, which she quickly unwrapped, revealing a slice of parkin, which she then broke in two. "Here you are, Connie. Your mum gave me this before we left. I'd forgotten all about it." "Good old Mum. She'll have made loads for bonfire night." "What night's the bonfire?" "Tuesday, in the old quarry again." "Come on, Rosie, it's getting cold." Having replaced her leg, Connie was eager to be on the move. "We'll walk along the edge towards Ashop Head and go down by William Clough." Rosie nodded assent, and they were soon over the stream that fed the downfall, Titch once more taking the lead, darting forwards, occasionally snuffling between the rocks as if searching for a scent, and then running back towards them as if to ensure they were following him. "You can see Stockport from here on a clear day," Connie pointed out. "Not much chance today," Rosie replied. "With a bit of luck, we'll have snow soon. Ralph's building a sledge. It'll be fine. He's learnt how to braze at night school, and he's making it with metal runners and a metal frame. He says it'll be super fast." "You need to be careful, Connie." I might be a one-legged cripple, but it's no more dangerous for me than anybody else." "You're right there, but I wasn't thinking of you. I was thinking of those who might just happen to be in your way." "You can be very provocative, Rosie Ackroyd." "I wonder where I caught it from." "Hang on a minute." Connie stopped in her tracks. "What's happening down there?" "Where?" She pointed. "There, in the quarry." Rosie screwed up her eyes. The quarry was a long way off. "It's just 3 men loading sheep into a trailer." "Yes, a trailer towed by a blue Land Rover. I bet that's the one that came at us last night." Rosie had the binoculars out in a flash. "Well, it is blue, but that doesn't mean—" Before she could finish, Connie was turning off the main path. "We can take a shortcut here down across Blackshaw. We might just get to the quarry before they've finished loading." Without waiting for a response, she was scrambling down a narrow track, little more than a sheep path, between the rocks on the edge, to begin the steep descent towards Kinder Head. Rosie followed in her wake, stuffing the glasses back into the case, not without difficulty. Unfortunately, by the time they got onto Blackshaw, the men were lifting the trailer's tailgate, fastening it into position. Moments later, They were driving towards Hayfield. Connie ejaculated. Too late, but I think we'd better tell Ralph. I'm sure none of the local farmers will be moving sheep at this time of day. The markets are held on Saturday morning and Wednesdays. We'll cut across to the farm from here instead of going to the quarry. Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 5. Is Ralph back yet, Mum? Good grief, Connie, love. Can't you enter the house in less of a rush? You're enough to give a body heart failure. It's important, Mum. No, not yet. She looked up at the old grandfather clock in the corner. I doubt if they'll be back for at least another half hour. What's got into you? Nothing. Nothing? 1 minute it's important and next it's nothing. No, Mum, I mean it's important, but nothing's got into me. OK, let's start again. What is so important, Connie, my love? Rosie turned away, attempting to suppress a laugh and having to turn it into a cough. As she did so, she noticed the headline on the front page of the Farmer's Weekly, resting on the cushion of Mr. Gartside's favourite armchair by the fire. Look at this, she said, grabbing the paper. She placed it on the table between Connie and Elsie. The headline read, Sheep Thieves in Longdendale. Isn't that just the other side of Glossop? Yes, Rosie, but what's this got to do with us? Connie gripped her mother's arm. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Mum. There was a Land Rover and trailer in the old quarry, and men were loading sheep into it. It was the same colour as the Land Rover and trailer that nearly hit us yesterday. Right, Connie. Why didn't you say that at first? I'll phone around and see if any of our neighbours were moving sheep. When was this? Only about half an hour ago. That's why I was suspicious. It was too late for today's market and far too early for Wednesday's. I'll put the kettle on, Rosie said, marching over to the sink. Good idea, Elsie responded as she picked up the phone and began to dial. I could murder a brew. Can I make some sandwiches, Mum? I'm starving and I bet Rosie is too. Yes, there's some cold beef in the fridge and a jar of pickle in the larder. Hello? Could I speak to your mother, Louise? Tell her it's urgent. They'd just finished their impromptu brew and snack when Ralph and his father returned. Elsie informed them what was going on. None of our neighbours have been moving sheep. I've phoned everyone. I've also phoned the police and given them a description of the Land Rover and trailer. They could have crammed at least a dozen into that trailer, Ralph pointed out. Aye, and a few more if they were determined, Mr. Gartside added. Did either of you notice whose sheep they were? Connie shook her head. We were too far away to see the markings, Father. What markings? Rosie asked, puzzled. All the sheep have painted marks on them, Rosie, Ralph responded. Each farmer has a particular colour so they can sort them out when they're brought off the hill. There were some with blue and some with a dark red. Blast! The red uns are towers, Mr. Gartside exclaimed. How many, lass? I'm not sure. By the time I had my binoculars out, they'd almost finished loading them. At least 3, I think. We'll be lucky to get away with 3, Father, Ralph responded. Aye, lad, and we Gartsides aren't famous for our luck, are we? Is the glass half full or half empty? Elsie responded. Ralph grinned, putting his arm round Connie's shoulder. Aye, don't be daft, Father. Your glass is more than half full. We've got my little sister, haven't we? And we could have so easily lost her 6 years back. Rosie gazed at him in admiration. What a lovely lad you are, Ralph Gartside, she said to herself, and not for the first time either. Anyhow, Elsie said, there's not much we can do tonight, but we can keep our eyes skinned from now on. We can make our own luck. If they were here yesterday and today, chances are they'll be back soon. We'd best spread word around the village, and Little Hayfield, Edale and Raworth, Birchvale and Chinley. In the meantime, I'll get tea on. Once we've had up meal, I can prepare for our guests. What time did they say they'd arrive, Connie? 8:30, Mum. It's on the notepad by the phone. At that point, the phone rang. Elsie sped across the room and lifted it to her ear. Oh, it's you, Jack. No, don't be daft. There's always space for one more. No, I won't hear of it. Come over now. You can eat with us. I'm just about to prepare the food. Never mind the sportsman. They can't match mine. She replaced the receiver, a beaming smile on her face. We've got a surprise visitor. Your grandad, young Rosie. You'd best go meet him and take extra torch. He's down in the village. It's pitch black out there. I'll come with you, Rosie, Ralph volunteered. And me, said Connie. Rosie looked at her. Connie frowned. Rosie didn't look happy. Elsie intervened. I need you here, Connie. You can help me prepare the meal, young miss. Rosie went to retrieve her jacket, woolly hat and scarf, a big grin illuminating her face. Ralph opened the door to allow Rosie out when Connie called after them. Are you going to tell him, Rosie? If looks could kill, Connie would have died on the spot. As it happened, she merely returned Rosie's glare with a mischievous and defiant laugh. Elsie chuckled and then turned away. Ralph looked nonplussed. What did Connie mean? He asked as they made their way across the yard. Rosie looked up at him with her bright blue eyes. I haven't got a clue, she lied. They were soon through the gate and walking down Colwell Clough. What have you been up to today, Rosie, apart from tracking down sheep rustlers? Trying to sort out your sister's love life and walking on Kinder. Connie's love life? She hasn't been falling out with poor Mikey again, has she? I think she's played hard to get once too often. Mikey was obviously feeling pretty miserable when we met him in the village this morning. She's always winding the poor lad up. What she doesn't realise is that Mikey's a very sensitive soul. Well, at least I think she's learnt her lesson. We called in to see him, and Connie asked him to come walking with us. Trouble is, he turned her down point blank, and said he didn't want to spend time with her. Good for him. Let's hope you're right, and she has learnt her lesson. Rosie looked up at him once more, although he was concentrating on the crumbling road surface and didn't notice. She finally plucked up her courage. Have you got a girlfriend, Ralph? He shook his head. There's a girl I like a lot, but who'd fancy a farmer's lad like me? Anyway, she's too young for me. She won't be 14 until the end of this month. You're only 17. When you're 20, she'll be 17, and when you're 30, she'll be 27. That's not a big difference. My dad was 7 years older than Mum. I never thought of it like that. He looked down at her and smiled. Maybe I'll ask her for a date on her birthday. He seemed to speed up as though the idea had put a spring in his step. Rosie was not happy. She wondered who the lucky girl could be. Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 6. It's good to see you again, Mr. O'Donnell. And you too, Ralph. But how many times do I have to ask you to call me Jack? Rosie smiled. It is good to see you, Grandad. How's Mum? I'm afraid she wasn't in a good mood when I left, Rosie, love. In fact, she wasn't in a good mood when I got home from my meeting last night. Oh, no. How did you upset her? Did you get home late? No, I haven't upset her. It's that dastardly blue blot on the landscape. What do you mean? Not what? Who, Rosie? Rosie shook her head. Grandad could be exasperating when he wanted to be. Who, then? That circus clown, John Major. Why's he upset, Ma'am? Evidently, whilst I was out last night, he was slagging off single parents on the television, going on about so-called family values, saying single mothers were a major British problem, and breeders of future generations of thieves, scoundrels and malcontents. Every news bulletin on the radio today repeated the message. No wonder Mum's hungry. I'll ask Mrs. Gartside if I can phone her when I get back. Good for you, Rosie. Anyway, I'm sure she'll sort her head out. I'm looking forward to a quiet break. Thank goodness I can relax here. Are you sure, Grandad? Why shouldn't I be? I might be planning a series of burglaries or muggings or something. I'm the daughter of a single mother, aren't I? I've a feeling you're more likely to channel any errant feelings into more useful and positive outlets, young Rosie. No doubt about that, Ralph agreed. Rosie's a girl of many talents. Oh, aye? What's she been up to now? Grandad, Rosie protested. Ralph laughed. She's taken on the role of advisor and peacemaker to lovelorn couples. Our Connie's upset Mikey Grimsditch again. The youngster stopped in her tracks. Goodness, I wonder if that's what really upset Mikey, she said thoughtfully. What do you mean, Rosie? John Major, Mikey's mother is single too. What if Mikey heard the speech? He might think he has no chance in life, that he's destined to be a delinquent. What if his mum heard the news? My mother's a single parent because she's a widow, Ralph. If she's so upset, just think of the effect on Mikey's mum. She didn't choose to be a single parent. She could be horribly upset as well, and Mikey might be blaming himself for being the cause of all her problems. Have you ever thought of becoming a social worker, Rosie? Grandad asked. No, of course not. I want to change things, not mess about with the symptoms. I'm going to be a political campaigner when I grow up. I'm going to sort out the land thieves and money grubbers and stick up for only common people like us and Mikey's mum. You've got my vote, Ralph retorted. Grandad chuckled. I don't know where she gets her ideas from. Mind you, Rosie, you could be a social worker and a political campaigner. And you have got to stop telling fibs, Grandad. You know very well where I get most of my ideas from. Grandad chuckled again. Chip off the old block, Ralph interjected. Less of the old, Grandad responded. Typical, Rosie said, shaking her head. Ralph and Grandad looked at her. What do you mean? Ralph finally asked. Both of you assumed I was referring to Grandad's ideas, but I wasn't. Well, not entirely. So, who exactly did you mean? The other communist in my life, my friend and mass trespasser, Benny Rothman. Good girl, Connie, that's all sorted. Let's have a break. Jed, how about putting the kettle on? Connie laughed. Feyther's fast asleep. Typical man. Go and give him a prod, Connie. Tell him he either makes us a brew or we're going on strike. Tell him we're joining the Wages for Housework campaign. Before Connie could make a move, Mr. Gartside gave out a final, explosive snore and looked across at them, his face a portrait of innocence. Would you like a brew, Elsie? Oh, that's so very thoughtful of you, dear. He hauled himself out to his more than comfortable armchair with a grunt. Put kettle on, Connie, love. I'll get cups. Connie looked at her mother, a frown on her brow. Mrs. Gartside laughed. At that point, the telephone rang. Connie was across the room before her parents had time to react. Looks as though you're putting kettle on after all, Jed, Elsie instructed. Gartside Farm? Yes. Oh, dear. No, don't worry. I'm sure that will be fine, Mrs. Gorbooth. Yes, just leave your car on the track once you are through the farm gate. Then walk round the back and through the yard. Yes. See you in about half an hour then. Bye. What's going on, Connie? Your paying guests have had a change of heart, Mum. Seems they were going to eat at the Sportsman. Evidently, they now prefer to eat here. You have to be joking. No, I'm not. Shall I go and give the fire a poke in the front room? Yes, love. But what am I going to do about food? You'll have to give them ours, I expect. This is the last thing I need. Don't worry, Mum. We'll manage. There's plenty of cold roast beef and roast ham, with homemade cheese. We're not going to go short. Mrs. Gartside shook her head and then smiled. Connie could always find the bright side of any cloud. Right, you go and get that fire roaring, At least they can eat their humble fare in a warm and pleasant room. They probably won't want to eat with us. I could always eat in the Sportsman, Elsie. That's ever so thoughtful, Jed, but there's plenty for you here. Are you sure, lass? I dunna mind. Well, I do. Now go and make that brew afore I think of something else for you to do. Wow, what make of car's that, Grandad? Looks like a Bentley, love. Somebody with brass slumming it in the Sportsman, no doubt, Ralph added. At that point, a middle-aged, well-dressed couple emerged from the pub. Of all the places to bring me, Robert, the woman exclaimed, full of working-class riff-raff with their walking boots and their sweat. Never mind, my dear, we'll soon be at the farm. He strode across the road and opened the passenger door for her. She took her seat with a swish of nylon and a flash of thigh as she tucked her legs into place. Having closed the door carefully, the gentleman looked up at the sky for a moment, as if for inspiration, or patience perhaps. The sound of approaching boots attracted his attention. He turned to them. "Excuse me," he asked in a home counties drawl. "Could you be so kind as to direct me to Colwell Clough? I'm heading for Gartside's farm." "That's where we're heading," Rosie responded. Grandad noticed she seemed to emphasise her Manchester accent, almost as if she was drawing attention to her working-class roots. He intervened. "If you continue in direction your car's facing and take first right immediately after the campsite, you're on the right road. Eventually, the lane'll begin to climb fairly steeply, and you'll find yourself travelling beneath a tunnel of trees. Immediately after, you'll see a tall stone barn, and the farmhouse adjoining it. Immediately after, turn left and stop. The farm gate will be closed. Once you're through it, you can park anywhere, but my advice is to keep to the left. They may need to use tractor in the morning." "Thank you, my man." That was extremely clear. With that he turned on his heel, walked in front of the car, and accessed the driving seat. The well-appointed car moved on its way with a purr. "He could have offered us a lift," Rosie observed. "He could have refrained from calling me his man, and my own man and a citizen of the world." "We could be in for an interesting weekend," Ralph responded, "but I'm sure I've seen that face before." "He didn't sound local," Rosie pointed out. "The knobs have their own particular and peculiar accent, Rosie, irrespective of which part of the country they're from. In the main, they go to the same public schools." They continued on their way, Ralph wondering how his parents would react to their guests. Connie Gartside's Triumph, Chapter 7. By the time they walked through the kitchen door, Jed was dozing off in front of the fire, and there was no sign of the strangers, Connie or Elsie. Ralph immediately busied himself putting the kettle on. Rosie collected the teapot and generally made herself helpful. Grandad sat down at the table, reluctant to disturb Jed. Titch knew his place and accordingly made himself comfortable on the mat in front of the fire. Elsie entered the room. "There you are. How are you, Jack? It's good to see you." "I'm fine, Elsie. You're looking well." "Do you want a brew, Mother?" "Yes, please, Ralph. I'm afraid I'm a bit harassed." She smiled at Jack. Unexpected guests. Said they wanted bed and breakfast and then decided they wanted an evening meal as well. We met them outside the Sportsman. Evidently they weren't enamoured by the riff-raff that frequent the place. I'm not sure they're too impressed with us either. Connie's showing them their room now. Mind you, I won't be too disappointed if they go. They haven't paid a deposit, so if they don't like us, they know what they can do. She's more stuck up than our Jersey cow. The door from the front room opened, and Connie entered the room. "Shush, Mum, they're coming downstairs. They'd like a cup of tea." "I've just brewed, Connie." "Great, Ralph. They'll think we're super efficient. Can you make another brew in a small stainless teapot, please? Then I can take that into them afterwards and really impress them." She selected 2 of their best china cups and saucers from the Welsh dresser, placing them on a tray with a small jug of milk, a bowl of sugar, and 2 silver apostle teaspoons. Then she carefully poured the tea without adding milk, lifted the tray, and departed the kitchen. "Here we are," they heard her say. "Please help yourselves to milk and sugar. I'll bring you a top-up soon." With that she returned to the kitchen, closing the door carefully behind her, a big grin on her face. Rosie noted there had been no sign of any thanks from the guests. "They'd like to start with soup, Mum." "Soup? How on earth am I going to make soup in time?" Connie laughed. "Easy. I explained we hadn't planned for evening guests, but I could provide leek and potato with Stilton cheese." "Very clever. But leek and potato isn't instantaneous either, and we haven't got any leeks." Connie left the kitchen through the door to the cellar, returning with a family-sized can of leek and potato soup and a large lump of Stilton. "We can't use canned soup. It's an emergency, Mum. Once the Stilton's melted into it, they won't have a clue." Elsie shook her head, gazed at her daughter for a moment, and then laughed. "You are a star, my darling Connie, you really are." Shrugged her daughter close and then frowned. "What about the main course?" "There's that shoulder of lamb and a leg as well in deep freeze," Jed pointed out. "Typical," Elsie retorted. "It'll take all night to defrost. Anyway, that's for tomorrow's dinner." "Mum," Connie intervened, "I've told them they have a choice. Homemade Lancashire hot pot made to my great-great-grandmother's secret recipe, or I told them they could have it with homemade pickled red cabbage, or homegrown and home-boiled sliced beetroot in best wine vinegar, or both. Are they happy with that?" He was. My lady seemed a bit unsure, but didn't argue, especially when I told her I could rustle up frozen fish fingers at a pinch. "We haven't got any fish fingers." "I know, Mum." She took the proffered teapot from Ralph and returned to their guests without more ado. Jed put his knife and fork down on his carefully mopped-up plate. "That were gradely, lass. You've done us proud again." "You certainly have, Elsie, and I, for one, would like to show my appreciation." Elsie looked at Jack O'Donnell quizzically. "How about you, Jed and me, nip down to the Sportsman? There's a good hour left before they call time." "That would be a real treat, Jack, but I have guests to look after." "Not till tomorrow, Mum," Connie informed her. "They've gone to bed, and they don't want breakfast till 9:30 tomorrow." 9:30? What a waste of daylight hours. "You should be pleased," Ralph pointed out. "Anyway, me and the girls can look after things here. Go and enjoy yourself for once in a while, Mother. You really deserve it." Elsie shook her head, but her face sported a smile. "OK, why not? I'd be a fool to refuse. Me and you have a date, Jack. Are you sure you want our Jed to accompany us?" "Suit yourselves," her husband retorted. "But I'm having a pint or 2 at the Sportsman, whatever you 2 decide." It wasn't long after the grown-ups had left, and they'd finished the washing up and had the cutlery and plates neatly stacked on the draining board, that Ralph put his hand on Rosie's shoulder to attract her attention. He nodded in the general direction of the fire. Connie was fast asleep, curled up on her father's armchair. Her artificial leg lay on the floor by the side of the chair, evidently superfluous to requirements. At that point, Titch rose, walked over to the kitchen door and began to scratch it with an uplifted front paw. Ralph stood up and let him out into the yard. "It's begun to snow, Rosie," he said softly. She joined him, as sure enough it was snowing, albeit thin wispy flakes. She looked higher up the moor. "Wow, the hill's already turning white on the top." Titch returned, having completed his business. They closed the door and returned to their seats at the kitchen table. Connie told me you were making a sledge. It's finished apart from the varnishing. Does it need to be varnished? Only the wooden seat slats. What a shame. We won't be able to test it tomorrow. Course we can. I can always varnish it later. Rosie's eyes lit up. Can I see it? Yes. Get your jacket and scarf. It's in my workshop. It'll be freezing in there. Having followed his advice, the girl followed Ralph outside, closing the door carefully so as not to wake Connie. He walked over to the building housing the cattle buyer and opened the first door. Rosie entered as Ralph switched on the light. She found herself in a square whitewashed room with an ancient workbench along the opposite wall, under a small barred window. Mounted on the wall to the left of the window was a board to which were clipped a variety of metal-cutting files and other hand tools. A large engineer's vice was mounted on the left-hand end of the bench. A sledge, manufactured from tubular steel, stood upright against the left-hand wall. 2 large cylinders, complete with pressure gauges, which Rosie knew contained oxygen and acetylene, respectively, were mounted in a trolley next to it. Oh, this is marvellous, Ralph. Why have you kept it a secret from me? Will you teach me how to braze and do bronze welding? Can you silver solder? He looked at her, obviously surprised. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. I don't want to be a social worker. I want to be an engineer like Grandad. I've wanted to be one ever since I can remember. She began to examine the sledge in great detail, running her fingers around the brazed joints as if looking for flaws. At last she turned to him. It's brilliant, Ralph. You obviously take pride in your work. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. She completed the statement for him. He laughed. You're full of surprises, Rosie Ackroyd. You're not bad yourself, Ralph Gartside. For a boy, that is. He smiled. We'd better get back in case Connie wakes up. OK, but Ralph... What, Rosie? You will teach me, won't you? Of course I will. That's brilliant. If we make some more, we might be able to sell them. He gazed at her for a moment. I never thought of making things for sale. Why not? You told me it's hard making the farm pay. Surely every little bit helps. Do you really think we could sell them, Rosie? Why not? Especially if we have a good hard winter. It's only the first week in November. January and February are the coldest months. Anyway, if we build 2 more and can't sell them, we can still make good use of them. Right, but we'd better give this a thorough test tomorrow to make sure I've got the design right. I've thought of that. We need a daredevil test pilot. Ralph's eyes narrowed and a frown crossed his brow. Rosie's face broke into a smile. Don't look so serious. I've already thought of just the person for the job. Who? You're Connie. He laughed. Rosie Ackroyd, I could kiss you. Do you want to switch the light off first? The lad blushed and shook his head. Connie Gartside's Triumph. Chapter 8. Elsie looked up as Ralph entered the warm kitchen. Would you like a cup of tea, Mother? I'll make it. You get in front of the fire. You look frozen. She retreated to the sink and began filling the kettle. I thought you were with Rosie and Connie. They've monopolised the sledge. They won't let me have a turn, so I thought I'd leave them to it. Are you sure Connie will be safe? I can't bear to think of her damaging herself. Mother, you should know by now that Connie's a risk-taker, but she does think carefully about her options. She might be crazy, but she's not daft. Anyway, I've learnt that the more I try and restrain her, the more likely she is to do it. Once the tea was brewed, Ralph joined his mother at the table. Have they gone? He asked, glancing upwards in the general direction of the main bedroom, reserved for guests. Have the heck? They're still in bed. They must be worn out, he returned with a wry smile. They disturbed his sleep with their antics more than once the previous night. He stirred the pot and then poured the tea. Elsie helped herself to milk and then passed the jug to him. "Where's Feyther?" "He went out with Jack as soon as they had breakfast. I thought they were going to join you and the girls." Ralph shook his head and took a sip of tea, looking at his mother through the vapour rising from his cup. "You're looking tired, Mother." Her eyes met his and she smiled. "No, I'm fine, Ralph." She frowned and looked thoughtful for a moment. Ralph had the idea she was about to impart some important information. He was right. "Ralph, I need to say something." "What, Mother?" I just want you to know you're very special to me. You've been wonderful with our Connie over the years." "Mother, you're embarrassing me. There's no need." "There's every need. Things could have turned out quite differently. You encouraged Connie from the moment she lost her leg. You gave her hope and encouraged her to think the unthinkable. You gave her the will to strive and overcome her difficulties. You—" "Stop it, Mother. Connie's very special. She did it all by herself." "Have it your own way, son, but she's not the only one you think is special, is she?" He put his cup down. "What do you mean?" "Rosie Ackroyd. You think she's special too, don't you?" He felt the colour rise from his neck upwards. Eventually, he responded. "She's full of surprises. She wants to be an engineer. She wants me to show her how to braze and bronze weld. She reckons we should make sledges for sale." Elsie smiled. "I know I should be, but for some reason I'm not surprised. Will you do it?" "Yes. Do you know she has a crush on you?" "Mother." "Never mind, Mother. She does, and I've a feeling it's not a one-way street." He remained silent. "I'm not saying it's wrong, Ralph. Rosie's a wonderful lass, but she's young and could be vulnerable. You're 17. Look after her, son. Don't rush things and don't do anything you might come to regret. Do you understand?" He looked into her eyes once more and then nodded. "Yes, Mother, I promise." "Right, we'll leave it at that. I know I can trust you, Ralph. Do you think I should wake them two up?" "No, Mother, leave them to it. You put your feet up while you have the chance." Inwardly, he breathed a sigh of relief. Later, he would realise his developing relationship with Rosie had just received his mother's seal of approval. "You'd have to go a long way to get a view as good as that." "Aye, you're right, Jack, and the snow makes it look quite new and clean and pure." Jack O'Donnell and Jed Gartside were leaning against the dry stone wall next to the Edale Cross, having visited a farmer in the tiny hamlet of Barber Booth. "Anyway, we'd best get moving. Elsie'll be wondering where we've gotten to." Jack took one last look at the distinctive breast-shaped summit of Malc Cowle across the Edale Valley. Then he looked down at the old medieval cross for a moment, remembering the young girl he'd first met there when he was a teenager, the young girl who was to become his wife and the mother of Billy, their son, and Alice, their daughter. After a brief moment he nodded to his companion, and the two men continued on their way. The sky was overcast and grey, but there was little wind. A couple of inches of soft snow covered the ancient bridle path beneath their feet. They kept to the central stony ridge. The snow hid ice in the track's depressions, which the day before had been small puddles of water. Neither man was a youngster any more, and they knew better than caught a slip on the treacherous surface. Jed was just about to inform Jack he reckoned the snow would have melted away by the following morning, when he stopped in his tracks. That looks like young Mikey Grimsditch." They'd reached a junction. The left-hand branch climbed up to South Head, near the source of the River Set, at a right angle, whilst the main track carried straight on before curving to the right. Here they would enter the steep-sided Colwell Clough, cut by the same swift flowing Set, which would take them back to the farm. A dark figure, oblivious to their approach, sat on the bank with his back to the dry stone wall, his head in his hands. "Hey, Mikey, what ails thee, lad?" The youngster looked up, obviously surprised at their presence. He looked dismayed, as though he'd been caught in the act of doing something he shouldn't be doing. "Hello, Mr. Gartside," he finally said, standing. "I was just thinking." His cheeks were damp and his eyes red. He'd obviously been crying. Jez shook his head. "You look frozen, son. Come along with us," he said in a tone so soft and gentle that it took Jack by surprise. "There's a cheering fire, good friends, and hot cocoa where we're going to." The lad remained silent, seeming unsure. "This is me mate, Jack O'Donnell. You know young Rosie that visits us. Jack's her grandfather." The lad and Jack exchanged nods in way of greeting, and Mikey managed to return the old man's smile. "Now, come on, lad, it's too cold to be hanging about in this spot. Me old eyes are watering, and thine are almost as bad as mine." He had his arm gently around the lad's shoulder before he had chance to decline the offer, and the three commenced walking homeward together. Eventually Jed broke the silence again. "Young Mikey's a rare talented lad," he informed Jack. "I met his mother on Kinder Road a couple of weeks ago." He looked down at the youngster, giving his shoulder a slight squeeze. "She told me about the reading lamp you'd made for her birthday, young un. I asked if I could see it." Mikey glanced upwards for a moment, but his face remained expressionless. It were a work of art in varnished oak, Jack, with a wonderfully carved ornate base. Young Mikey'll make a real craftsman if he sticks to his last." Jack noticed the lad's countenance seemed to lighten and his back straightened slightly. "Being able to manufacture things with your own two hands is a source of great satisfaction," Jack responded. "Aye, I reckon so, although my old hands are only fit for sheep shearing and sheep washing." They reached the farm, and Jeb began to open the gate. The Bentley had disappeared. "I'll be off then, Mr. Gartside." "Nay, lad, thy mother'd never forgive me if I let thee walk home without hot drink in thee. Come on, and dunna bother arguing, 'cause you'd be wasting your breath. Anyway, our Elsie'll want to say hello to yous." The lad didn't bother arguing, although he'd rather have carried on. He half hoped Connie wasn't in, and half hoped she was.